Boker Tov, we just have a minute or two. I'm just going to make the preliminary announcements. First of all, Chodesh Tov. Yesterday was Rosh Chodesh, and it should be a Chodesh of Bsorot Tovot, Yeshuot v'Nechamot for all of OUisrael. The months of Tammuz and Av didn't always bring good fortune for OUisrael, but the Navi Zechariah teaches us that all of the 4 fast days, against the background of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, they're going to be transformed into Yamim Tovim. Tzom HaRevi'i, Tzom HaChamishi, Tzom HaShvi'i, Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 4th month, Tammuz, the fast of the 5th month, Av, the fast of the 7th month, Tzom Gedalia, the fast of the 10th month, Asara B'Tevet, Yiyu LeBeit Yisrael, L'Soson Simcha U'Lemoadim Tovim. And we're just anxiously waiting for that day that we should have the great merit and zchut to actually see it happen. That's all. I will say that the reading carefully in the Rambam, it seems that it's 2 stages. There'll be stage 1 where there'll be an abolition of the days as fast days. And then stage 2 will be the building on the calendar dates, Yamim Tovim. So it's not going to happen in one split second. Apparently it's something that's of a more gradual. But whatever it is, we hope to see get the ball rolling on this one. This morning's shir, all the shiurim today at the center are in memory of Rabbi Dr. Chaim Eliezer Schertz. It's given by the children and grandchildren on the 6th yahrzeit. And as always, all the shiurim this year are in memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima, Bat Zalman, Zichronah Lebracha. And it should be also for Shlema, for our Chayalim and everybody in the various Piguim who need desperately Refuah Shlema. Last week, we touched on Psukei de Zimra and Pirkei Hallel. I was pointed out that it's not an accident that the section of TEHILIM reading that we do every morning before davening, before Shacharit. You say before davening. I mean, I'm at shul already. I'm davening already, Yeah. So I pointed out that Shacharit technically starts with the bracha of Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech. That's where it starts. And everything else is preliminary. And the preliminaries are Psukei de Zimra. We even have preliminary of the preliminaries in the Siddur, the Birkot HaShachar, the section of Korbanot. Those are the sections when people come late, they just never get to. So they're not even aware that they're there. Let me just say, Bruchim Habayim to certain Panim Chadashot. I see some new faces here, and I was thinking maybe it's a Sheva Brachos or something that we have Panim Chadashot. Welcome to the Shiurim. So technically, that's when Tfilah B'tzibur starts, as the Rambam says. The Shliach Tzibur gets up, says Kaddish and Baruch Hu, and they start rolling. And everything beforehand was without a Tzibur. You don't need a community. You don't need a minyan for Psukei de Zimra. And that's why there's no problem having a child, 7, 8, 9 years old, leading the people with Psukei de Zimra, because it's not a tzibur thing at all. And by the Sfaradim, there's no chazan at all for Psukei de Zimra. Just somebody sits and he's a pace setter and just says it out loud. And that was probably also took into consideration the era where people didn't have sidurim. So somebody said it out loud, but he was from a seat, and there was no shliach tzibur function whatsoever. And that's called Psukei de Zimra. And we pointed out last week that the Gemara says that it's wonderful for a person, it's lauded, a person who completes Hallel every day. And then the Gemara says, 1 second, that can't be. There's a conflicting Gemara that suggests that it's blasphemous to say Hallel every day. And the Gemara makes a distinction between Psukei de Zimra, which is lauded, and saying the Hallel, as we call it Hallel, which should not be done on a routine basis. And that's the whole problem with saying Hallel every day. It just becomes routine. It becomes routine, you miss the whole point. I can tell you that we have this issue sometimes with crisis tefillah. Crisis tefillah is where you introduce something extra because it's a crisis moment. you have to know when to take this, to remove this and say, okay, the crisis is behind us, and not continue. I'll tell you that my father-in-law, who last week was his yard site, he lived in Kew Garden Hills many years, the end of his life, and I would visit him there and go to Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld's shul, the Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills. Very lovely, great rabbi and great shul and everything. And I'd come there, and I see they were saying a parak Tehillim after Aleinu, after davening. So I thought something, God forbid, happened in the neighborhood. I said, what are you saying Tehillim for? So they said, for the matzav in Eretz Yisrael, for the situation in Eretz Yisrael. That particular day was Africa very good in Eretz Yisrael. I was wondering what exactly they were saying Tehillim for the matzav in Eretz Yisrael. I said, how long are you saying this Tehillim? He said, since the Yom Kippur War. I said, from the Yom Kippur War, that was 1973. I said, you're still saying this? What are you going to do when we really have a problem? He says, we'll say another parak. Well, you have to know how to stop. That it loses its clout to say Tehillim for an emergency situation, and you keep going. We have this now, but we still have an emergency situation. And so at the beginning, there were people saying Avinu Malkeinu every day, and that too was a big issue, because Avinu Malkeinu, we always sense that it's a fast day, it's Slichas, it's Yom Noraim, and okay, Besedas, at the beginning of the outbreak of the war, the first month or two, people felt this, but then people said, you know what, it's losing its clout, and what are we going to do on a public fast day? You're not going to say Avinu Malkeinu twice. I mean, it's something that many shuls dropped, correctly so in my humble opinion, because not that the situation got better, but because you have to just drop it, or else we lose, the whole concept of special and important and central tefillot for crisis moments. And that's why the Gemara says on the flip side, with regard to Hallel, praising God, TORAH Chazal taught us that there was a mitzvah of Hallel, Beseda, for special moments. But if you make it into a routine, then it loses its whole clout. And that's why the Gemara says it's like blasphemous for somebody to say Hallel every day. On the other hand, Psukei Zimra is lauded. We say it every day. And the question is, what is the big difference? This is Hallel, this is TEHILIM, and this is TEHILIM. I mean, my gosh, what is Hallel in the Siddur, if not TEHILIM, Perek, Kuf Yud Gimel, Kuf Yud Dalet, Kuf Tet Vav, Kuf Tet Zayin, Kuf Yud Zayin, Kuf Yud Chet. That's what Hallel is. It's lifted out of TEHILIM. And what's Psukei Zimra? Other prakim, the tail end of Sefer TEHILIM, but it's also TEHILIM. So why is one considered wonderful if you say it every day, and we do say it every day, and one, it's there for special moments. So on this... this is where we left off last week, that Psukei Zimra is not called Psukei Zimra, the verses, as an accident, but it's deliberately called Psukei Zimra, as opposed to Pirkei Hallel, the chapters. Now both are chapters, and both have verses, but one is called Psukei Zimra. And this is where I got into the whole discussion that the very reading of the written law is a mitzvah, even if you don't understand what you're reading, because there's behind every reading of the written law is a type of song and Hallel that God gave us the Torah. And that's why the Torah calls itself Shira. V'ata kitvu lechem et hashira azot in Parshat Vayelech. So it's also a song. And as a song, you don't need a community. There's no responsive reading. It's just an individual reading, recitation. And the idea of the minimum quantitative value of fulfilling the mitzvah of Torah study, of Torah shebichtav, of the written law, is a verse. And that's why the Gemara says that when we educate our little children to Torah, we start by teaching him a pasuk. Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov, or a pasuk, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokei Hashem Echad. Teaching a child a fraction of a pasuk, one has not yet fulfilled the mitzvah of teaching one's child Torah. Because Torah means at least reading a full verse. If you don't read a full verse, then it's not considered Talmud Torah. And I'll just say something tangentially. We're very careful not to spout out Shem Hashem, the name of God, unless it's the context of davening or reading the Torah and so on. But there are many people in the context of a shir, and they'll quote a pasuk, they'll say Hashem, Elokeinu. They won't say God's name. So just to be very, very precise here, if you're only quoting partial pasuk, then that's correct. Just to say, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe. But if I say Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor, there's good reason to say Shem Hashem, because it's a whole pasuk. And when you read a pasuk, it's not Hashem. And I can tell you that some bar mitzvah teachers make the colossal mistake of training the bar mitzvah boy with the parsha, and he says Hashem, 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 and he comes to the Shabbat bar mitzvah, and he gets this Baruch Hu et Hashem Hamvorach. Excuse me? So in training, you're allowed to say Shem Hashem. In training for chinuch, you're allowed to say Shem Hashem, even a partial pasuk, and even a bracha. So when you want to train a bar mitzvah boy to say the brachot properly, you use the proper Shem Hashem as if it was the real McCoy, as it was the real saying of a bracha. And that's important. But if in the context of teaching Torah, there's nothing wrong with quoting a whole pasuk with God's name. That's proper, that's okay. But if it's only partial pasuk, so then we're a little bit more careful. So we have to understand the difference between perek and pasuk. So the reading of psukim is an individual thing, and that you don't need a minyan. And what we really have is psukei de zimra. We're saying psukim, and that's all it is. But when we get to the reading of Hallel, that's a different story. And we're going to see that even though our general custom is that if a person is, for whatever reason, davening at home on Yom Tov or Rosh Chodesh or Hanukkah, the person is going to say Hallel anyway, that wasn't always the case, and it's not in accordance with all of the opinions. Many, many opinions, and the Rambam's going to be the first one to lead the pack here, believe that Hallel is a public recitation, which means not just that in a forum, but it's a minyan. A formal minyan obligates the saying of Hallel on those days that was ordained that we should say Hallel. And it's not just blabbled up, but it's said with the chazan and a chorus. And the chorus are the people. So the question is, what does the chorus say? We're going to get to this. And how do we fulfill that today? Hardly. But things have really eroded in terms of the absolutely proper way of saying Hallel. But we're going to see that Hallel is a matter of a chazan v'kahal, a chazan and a community that then is responsive reading to something that the chazan leads. Yeah, Makshan.
Sorry, I missed the beginning. Did you say that a person davening on his own should not say Hallel?
I didn't say that. I said that our custom is that we do say Hallel. Our custom is that we do say Hallel even privately, even though that was not the opinion of the Rambam and other greats. Okay, so that happens that it happens that we don't hear also. But that happens that the Rambam says what he says, and then Ashkenazim do things differently. Okay, because the Rambam's not the only one in town, except that he's the leading spokesman here to give us ideas. And you know, the idea that in the yeshiva world, the Rambam is the basic text on the table, but the yeshiva world is a very Ashkenazi thing. Lithuania was not Sephardi at all, because the Rambam was subsequently not used for Rambam's original intention, and to be a type of Shulchan Aruch, a guide for halacha for everybody. That talked to the Yemenites. That's what they do. They use the Rambam Mishneh Torah as their guide. But the Ashkenazim and other Sfaradim who've moved on to Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Beit Yosef in Shulchan Aruch, and not the Rambam as the primary text for halacha, nevertheless will not move without Rambam in any Torah discussion, because the book is now being used to crystallize concepts in halacha, because that's how precise the Rambam was, and it becomes essential, even though our halacha lemaaseh, our day-to-day halacha, may not be fully in accordance with what the Rambam said as his bottom line. But nevertheless, it's extremely helpful to use the text of the Rambam so that we understand what's going on. So, with regard to Psukei de Zimra, let's just say a last word on it. So if you have the text in front of you, it's going to be in the source number 2, but the second paragraph where it says Halacha Yud Gimel. But if you don't have it, I'm going to translate it out loud anyway. Yesh mekomot shenahagu bahen likrot b'chol yom achar shemevorchin yishtabach shirat hayam. There were those who had the custom that after yishtabach to read Az Yashir Moshe, shirat hayam. Now that's going to sound a little strange because we say it before Yishtabach. So already you're getting an idea, a sense that we're not doing we Ashkenazim are not doing everything that the Rambam is writing here. But here he's not saying to do it. He's saying there are customs. There are those who have such a custom, and then they begin the brachot of Shema. Yotze orim barechoshech, and so on. V'achar mevorchin al Shema. V'yesh b'komot, and there are other places, says the Rambam, shekorin ha'azinu, the Shira of ha'azinu. That's the tail end of Sefer Dvarim, and not Shirat Hayam. Now, I don't know anybody who has that custom. And then he says, V'yesh yichidim, and there are individuals, shekorim shtei hashirot, that read both of these songs, Shirat Hayam, Az Yashem Moshe, and Ha'azinu. And he says, Hakol lefi ha'minhag, just abide by the custom. Now, here I'm just going to make a point that in Mishneh Torah Shel Rambam, one of his signature points in the whole book is I do not bring differences of opinion. The whole book is based on a very Israeli concept, smoch alai, trust me. It's the kind of thing when you bring the car into the garage, for repair, and he tells you, smoch alai, trust me. And then you're in big trouble, right? Means beware. Yafeh ma'od. It means beware. Right. So if he says smoch alai, then you're in beware. And if he tells you v'ani asader lecha et zeh, I'll take care of it, then you're in deep trouble. Deep trouble. Right. But the Rambam had the audacity, the gall and audacity to say, I'm writing a book, and I'm not even telling you my source material, and I'm not bringing down variant opinions, and just take it or leave it. And he was hoping everybody would take it. In his own generation, in Alexandria, Egypt, there was Rabbi Pinchas Hadayan who challenged the Rambam with very, very vocal opposition. He says, 1 second, where's the source material? I want to check him out. I mean, lahavdil, can you imagine giving a doctorate dissertation at the university and you have a thesis? The only thing is you left out footnotes and bibliography. And you tell all the professors, just trust me, I know what I'm talking about. That's not going to fly. It's not going to work, right? So, and they challenged the Rambam on this. And Rambam apologetically says, look, I'm telling you, I didn't make this stuff up. It's all there, and here are my sources, and so on. But that's the way he did it. That's the way that was his opinion. The only exception where the Rambam gives us various opinions is with regard to custom, minhag. And it's obvious that the Rambam could not decide, and he would not decide about custom, about minhag. And the reason is that when it comes to halakha, there the Rambam felt more comfortable. When it comes to halakha, the Rambam felt more comfortable making decisions. And when it comes to minhag, he realized that there's a big issue with minhag. And I can tell you this from the vantage point of a community rabbinate. If somebody asks me a question in halakha, even if the answer is going to be, no, you can't do it, if the person is genuinely a God-fearing person, you say what you have to say, don't do it. But when it comes to minhag, you're starting up with a person's family. You're starting up with his identity. You're starting up with his ego. Something about minhag that's lower on the totem pole of halakhic value, even though there's a concept, minhag Yisrael dinhu, if it's a minhag, it's like a din. That was said just to make sure that you keep the minhagim seriously. But the truth is, the level of minhag is less than the level of any halakha, whether it's biblical or rabbinic. And yet, people are really sticklers for it. It's my minhag, and don't tell me what to do, and don't change it. You have this problem in shul sometimes, where if a shul doesn't have a defined minhag, and somebody says, this is the minhag, and this is the... So the Rambam was aware of it. And therefore, he was careful not to slam the door on doing it one way if it was something that was customary. He would even say, minhag pashut. Minhag pashut translated is not a simple custom, but a widespread custom. If it's minhag pashut b'chol Yisrael, it's a customary amongst all of Klal Yisrael, then the Rambam is saying, yes, this is the way we do it. But he's advising us that it's not a halacha. It might even be going against the grain of halacha, but if everybody's doing it, and it does not go against any of the tenets, the basic tenets of Judaism, all right, we can live with it. I'll give you a good example. According to the Rambam, the saying of Tachnun, those that we say after Shmon Esrei, I mean, basically, we call it in English supplication. Once upon a time, when people said Tachnun, they fell down on the floor and they cried like a baby, and the feeling was this is inappropriate for Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we won't say Tachnun on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Now today we don't fall on the ground. We call it Nefilat Apayim. We just make a little gesture as symbolic falling. And the Sfaradim don't even do that, by the way. They just sit down and say the Rachum V'Chanun, the parak of Tachnun. The Rambam actually believes, in theory, that even on Shabbat and Yom Tov, there should always be Tachnunim after Shmon Esrei, because it's part of Shmon Esrei, he says. It's not an add-on, it's not an appendix. He believes it's part of the Tefillah. But Minhag Pashut, B'chol Yisrael, there's a widespread custom amongst all of Klal Yisrael, not to say Tachnun on Shabbat and Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah and Purim and on the Friday afternoon before Shabbat or before Yom Tov. The list of the days that we don't say Tachnun according to the Rambam is very, very brief, by the way. And yet what's happened to that list, when you get to Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, you get to the Ramah, Ramosha Isilis, you get to later the Aruch HaShulchan, it's like the theory of the expansion of the universe. It only gets greater and never shrinks. Once something gets on that list, even if it could be in the 19th century, that's it. It's here to stay till Mashiach time. So the list has grown and has become the whole month of Nisan, we don't say Tachnun, and half the month of Sivan, we don't say Tachnun, and from after Yom Kippur till Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, we don't say Tachnun. There were like clunks of days that we don't say Tachnun. And then all kinds of add-ons, nowadays, so we've added Yom Ha'atzmaut, we've added Yom Yerushalayim, and what was added on was Tu B'Shvat and Tu B'Av and like Ba'omer, all kinds of days, and then started all kinds of Rebbe's Yartzites, and don't ask. I remember there was a shul in Borough Park that had a calendar that every single day was some Rebbe's Yartzeit, and they didn't say Tachnun the whole year. You want to know something very interesting? There was one calendar date that no Rebbe ever died, the 5th of Iyar, which was Yom Ha'atzmaut. And they said Tachnun that one day a year, so nobody should think, God forbid, that they were deleting Tachnun because of Yom Ha'atzmaut. So if I'm already on a roll. So 3 years ago, I was in Los Angeles for a Shabbos, and my guest brought me to a shul Friday morning to daven. Okay, fine. Some Chassidish or Beis Medrash. I davened there Friday morning, and they didn't say Tachnun. So my first initial thing is, do I wish somebody Mazel Tov? Is there a Chosin here? Is there a Brit here today? Well, what's going on? They're not saying Tachnun. So they said, no. We never say Tachnun here Friday morning. Okay, Meseda, they don't say that. The minig is not to say for Mincha, for Shabbos, but they don't say Friday morning. But the guy told me, a few weeks ago we had a real problem. The 5th of Iyar came out on Friday, and they said if they're going to not say Tachnun on the 5th of Iyar, so somebody's going to think that they're doing it because of Yom Ha'atzmaut. So somebody said, but when the 5th of Iyar comes out on Friday, so the government moves it back to Thursday, on the 4th of it. Yom Ha'atzmaut was on Thursday, not on Friday. So the response was, we don't hold from the government. So they didn't know what to do. They were in a quandary. The 5th of Iyar on Friday, to say Tachnun and not say Tachnun. All right. We say that. That's a bit tired now. The question of these extras, after Psuga de Zimra, where, according to the Rambam, was it? After Yishtabach. But before the Chazan said Baruch Hu. So we have an illustration of that phenomenon, and it's called Shir HaMalot Mimamakim in the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. From Rosh Hashanah until and including Yom Kippur, between Yishtabach and Baruch Hu, we say Shir HaMalot. And we make a big deal about it. We have somebody open up their own Kodesh, and the Chazan says it pasuk by pasuk with a lot of fervor. And sometimes these Pirkei Tehillim, under certain circumstances, you see people, really kvetching it out, and then in other circumstances, gobbling it up. Like Labnatzech Mizmola David Yancha Hashem B'Yom Tzara Yisagevcha Hashem Elei Yaakov, which is extremely important parak to say these days, how difficult it is. Ele Varecha Ve'ele Vasusim V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Naskir Hema Karu V'Nafalu V'Anachnu Kamnu V'Netodad Adonai Yashia Melech Yanein V'Yom Korenu. Yet every morning between Ashrei and Avolotzion, you just gobble it up. But if it's an occasion to say Tilim for something, all of a sudden it's said with great fervor. Yeah. That is number 20. That was a tricky question. Tricky question. To ask somebody what parak Tilim. Beseda. No, it's okay. It's okay. Okay. Beseda Gamor. Beseda Gamor. No. It's parak Kaf and Tilim. There. So here you have the usage of that pause between Yishtabach and Baruch Hu. We have this minhag, this custom of saying Shir HaMalach Mimamakim, and some Kehilot also do it on Hoshana Rabbah. On Hoshana Rabbah in the morning, because it's like the quasi-ending of Yamim Noraim. Beseda, but the Rambam has the two Shirot. Now, Hazinu, we don't have at all. And Shirat Hayam we do have, but we moved it into Psukkah Zimra. We moved it into Psukkah Zimra. And the proof is, the bracha of Yishtabach is the end bracha of Psukkah Zimra, and now we have Shirat Hayam. Not only that, we have a few other things there. We have Vavarach David. Where did that come in? Vavarach David, that's a whole section from Divrei Hayamim. Why was that thrown in? So that was thrown in the 11th century. There was a group called Yordei Merkava. Yordei Merkava means those who descended from the chariot. The chariot was the vision that Yecheskel Hanavi had in Perek Aleph and Perek Gimel of seeing something about the upper worlds. And he sees a chariot and all kinds of images on the chariot. The Rambam spends a long time in his Moreh Nevuchim, Guide to the Perplexed, trying to interpret the vision. Exactly what was the implication, what was the meaning. So the concept of Yordei Merkava was a group of pre-Kabbalists. This is before the movement of the Kabbalist movement, but they were up there in the sky. And they came down from the heavens, as if to say. Sometimes you see somebody who's just, not with us, we say he's a Himmel Yid. He's up there in the heavens. I learned when I started teaching in Beersheva in 1981, so I learned all kinds of Hebrew phrases from kids, from other teachers, and so on. So a student who's called an astronaut is somebody who's up in the clouds. He doesn't have 2 feet down on the ground. And a student who you don't hear from him the whole year is called an atzitz. He's a plant. A plant in a flower pot. Because, he just sits there. That's it. So these are words that are used in the teachers' meetings. So astronaut, beseda. But Yordei Merkava were up there, highly spiritualized people, so they were known as the Yordei Merkava. They came down from the chariot. They were up there in the chariot of Yecheskel. And they believed that they were the first actually to introduce the 7 concentric circles from the world of physical reality until you get up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Now, many of us are familiar with this because in the Siddur by Sfirat HaOmer, each day is given a name, Chesed, and the first week is Chesed. So the first day is Chesed Shebechesed, the next day is Gvura Shebechesed, and the next day is Tiferet Shebechesed, until you get to the end of the week, Gvura Malchut Shebemalchut, which is the 49th day. So people are familiar with these terms. There's even 3 rungs that go higher than the 7 rungs, and they are Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at. Those are the letters of Chabad. And I'll say this, tonight is Gimel Tammuz. I'll say in memory of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, passed away 30 years ago, right, on the 3rd of Tammuz. So that's where the name Chabad came from, Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at. And these were the Yordei Merkava believed that you have to bring your tefillah rung by rung up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And how do you do it? So they believed that singing does it. Music acts as a type of clutch. Remember, you used to have manual transmission? You had to move from gear to gear, from rung to rung, and you need a clutch. And the clutch was singing. And the singing brought you from one level to another level to another level, and so on. And they introduced, as the end of Psukei Zimra, Vayvarach David, because of the pasuk, Lecha Hashem Hagdula v'Hagvura v'Tiferet v'Netzach v'Ahod. It doesn't have all of them there, but some of them there, to tune us into the fact that this is our objective now of moving up the rungs from the bottom one to Chesed all the way up to Malchut, and trying to get the Tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it was introduced in the 11th century, and we still say it till this very day, the Vayvarach David. So with regard to Shirat Hayam, why is it there? Well, why not? We have a nice song in the Chumash itself, but we have to do better than that. We have to do better than that. But Shirat Hayam actually teaches us something that's not Psukei Zimra. It teaches us something about Chazan and Kahal. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Sotah that teaches us that our reading of Hallel should be like Shirat Hayam, or Shirat Hayam should be like Hallel. What does that mean? Moshe Rabbeinu, how many people of Am Yisrael said the whole Shirah? Did they hand out pages? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu is composing Azar Shir Moshe. Okay, so who knows the text? Nobody knows the text. So how can everybody say the Shira? So, okay, so what did they say? So it says, Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael et HaShira Zot. There are two components here. There's Moshe and there's Bnei Yisrael. So what did they all say? Ashira Lashem ki go'o ga'a sus v'rochvo rama vayam. Now that's one pasuk that you can very easily teach everyone to say that pasuk. Moshe Rabbeinu goes on, Ozi v'zimrat ya v'hili lishua ze eli v'anveyu Elohei avi v'aromemenu. And now strikes up the choir, Ashira Lashem ki go'o ga'a sus v'rochvo rama vayam. That's all the people said after each pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu says. Moshe Rabbeinu goes on pasuk by pasuk. It's a Mishnah in Masechet Sotah. I think it's the 5th parak. And it says, Kikorei et Hallel. That the Shirat Hayam was like Hallel. Why is like Hallel? Because the Rambam's going to teach us that Hallel, at least in one framework of Minhag, was that the people never said Hallel. The Chazan said Hallel. Pasuk by pasuk. But after each pasuk, there was a response. And the only question is, what was the response? According to one opinion, every parak of the Hallel, its first pasuk is the headline. So, B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez, everyone said. And then the Chazan said, Haytal Yuda lekocho Yisrael mam shalotav, and then the people said, B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. And the Chazan went on with the next pasuk. And the people, B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. We have a vestigial organ, something that remained from this minhag, by Hodul Hashem Kitov. The proper way of saying Hodul Hashem Kitov is the Chazan, and Chazan only says the 4 lines, Hodul Hashem Kitov Kelam Chazdo, Yomana Yisrael Kelam Chazdo, Yomruna Beit Ahron, Yomruna Yer Hashem, only the Chazan, and the Kahal repeats Hodul Hashem Kitov Kelam Chazdo. So I know that there's a minhag that belachach, under one's breath, one gobbles up the next pasuk. I heard this as a child, so I started doing it also. It happens to be categorically wrong, but it's not an avera, okay? You know, it's not a hefsek. Of course, if you were a real brisket, they'd say it was a hefsek. But I don't think it's a hefsek. But there's no reason to say it. And why do people say it? Because they think the more they say, the more, brownie points they get in Gan Eden. But it's not true. That this is the way to say Hodul Hashem is the original way of how the way Hallel was said. And the only question is, why did we lapse into a different mode of saying Hallel. That's a historic question, why that happened. But the Rambam is going to tell us that was one of the modes of saying Hallel, exactly the way it was done by Shirat Hayam. So only Moshe Rabbeinu said the text of Shirat Hayam, and Am Yisrael, after each pasuk, responded, Ashiru Hashem ki ga'oga'a such v'chol ramavayam. So you had Chazan v'Kahal. The other variant of response was not to repeat the pasuk, but to say the word hallelujah after each pasuk. After each pasuk of Hallel. Okay, let's assume we do it that way. How many times did the Kahal have to say and respond hallelujah? Quickly. How many times? How many end pasukim do you have in Hallel? How many sentences do you have in Hallel? Nobody's going to know, right? It's a nice round number, 123. So what does that mean? So, Yafeh ma'od. Yafeh ma'od. The Rambam, based on a Yerushalmi, says it's kiminyan shnotav shel Ahron HaKohen, corresponding to the years of Ahron HaKohen. Because Moshe Rabbeinu and Ahron, one was 80, Moshe was 80 at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and Ahron was 83. That you see in the Chumash. And they both die 40 years later. So Moshe is 120, that says clearly, and Ahron is 123, and that says clearly too. And by the way, Ahron HaKohen's passing away is marked by the calendar date Rosh Chodesh Av, Chodesh HaChamishi Bechad HaChodesh. It's the only Yortzeit in the Chumash. The only one. Even the 7th of Adar of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's figured out. It's not there. It's Torah Shabbat. But Ahron HaKohen, B'chodesh HaChamishi, B'chad l'chodesh, is mentioned specifically in Sefer Dvarim. It's not in Sefer Dvarim, the end of Sefer Bamidbar, Moshe Rabbeinu's Yortzeit. Beseda, he's 123 years old. So what? So why was that? So you don't say Tachnan here. Because it's Rosh Chodesh anyway. Yeah. Good. I think the Rambam said Tachnun even on his own Yortzeit, on the 20th of Tevet. Our Rebbe, the Rav Soloveitchik, the Rav said that how did Am Yisrael know to respond to the initiative of Moshe Rabbeinu? How did they know that after Moshe Rabbeinu is going to say a pasuk, they have to respond, Ashiru Hashem? There had to be a choir leader. Somebody had to guide them. So it must have been Aaron, who was the number 2 in command. And therefore, as a gesture to Aaron HaKohen, who taught Am Yisrael to respond to the saying of Hallel of the Chazan, we will have 123 responses in the Hallel. Yeah. Right, so we don't do that for Shirat Hayam, nor do we do it for Hallel. It just flattened out. The whole original idea flattened out, and to try to understand why, I don't have a good historic moment when it happened. I'm sure this is a gradual evolution of something just panning out, and it just wasn't kept. But at least we can understand the original idea, because that teaches us the concept of prakim. Because only with Chazanim do you have the concept of a perek, who will start B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim, and it will be B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim as the refrain until the next perek. Hashem v'zacharanu yivarech. That's the next perek. So there's a concept of a chapter where it comes to Hallel, as opposed to Psukkah de Zimra, where there's a concept of verses of Psukim. And a Chazan will go through the motions of reciting with a minyan, I'm stressing now with a minyan, the Pirkei Hallel. If we just follow through with Shirat Hayam, so it says that the women also responded. Vatan lahem Miriam, Shiru Lashem ki ga'o ga'a, sus v'rochvo ramavayam. So it doesn't say the whole Shira there. All it says is that one pasuk, which is the refrain. And of course, the Parshanim ask, how come by the men it says Ashira Lashem, and by women it says Shiru Lashem? That's a good question that the commentators tried to explain why the women responded with the word Shiru Hashem. If you allow me just a slight fit of humor, is because they didn't hear it from the Oded Ezrat Nashim. They didn't hear the word Ashira and thought they heard Shiru. But okay, I'm not going to put that over as a serious idea. What? that they already, the poskim point out, Rivka is not a joke, the poskim point, the commentators point out that that's why it was betupim uvim cholot, that they had all kinds of tambourines and drummers to drown out the koil isha. That is brought down, by the way. That was done specifically. But with regard to the word shiru as opposed to ashira, that I say the Parshanim deal with that. But basically, the women responded just like the men responded. They responded to the Hallel. And this is now part and parcel. Yavaksha. Right. Our saying of Hallel is not done in accordance the way the Chazal wanted Hallel to be said. And the only reason that we still survive saying Hallel like this, because something that the Rambam's going to say, I've seen different minhagim with regard to Hallel, just do it the way your minhag is. Now, you can see he says, listen, I'm going to explain to you the way Hallel should be. And then he says, but out there's just so many different variations. So yeah, you'll have the page on the second page, the very last source, the very, very, very last source, where the 2 lines for the end, the Rambam says, Zeu minhag harishon ubo ro'ui leilech. I'm telling you the way it should be, and so on. Ava b'zmanim eilu, but nowadays, re'iti b'chol ha'mekomot minhagot mishunot. I've seen. You might translate it strange or different or weird, whatever it is. I've seen really different minhagim b'kriyato ubin aniyat ha'am, not only in its reading and the way the community responded. Ve'ein echad behem domeh la'acher. Not one doesn't look like the other. And in previous line he says, Hakol lefi minhag. Just follow the custom, and that's all. So nobody's going to hold us accountable that we're saying Hallel wrong, because if a Kadosh Baruch Hu, after 120 years, says, hey, you said Hallel wrong all those years, you whip out this Rambam and say, okay, listen, the Rambam covered me. He said that the custom carries the day, and that's it. But nevertheless, the Rambam felt they were obliged to teach us how it really should be done. So now we're going to get into a little bit more specifics, but I just want to say a few words yet about Shirat Hayam. Did you notice that when you get to the end of Shirat Hayam, Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed, and then it says again, Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed, and in some Siddurim, in parentheses, in translation, there's the Aramaic, which is the Onkelos. What is that? And then all of a sudden, there are psukim from Nevi'im. Ki L'Hashem Amlucha Moshe Baroyim, V'alu Moshe Bar Tzion L'Shpot Atarisav, V'ayta L'Hashem Amlucha, does that sound familiar? That grouping of psukim, ve'alu Mosheim b'Har Tzion l'shpot harisav, v'ayta Hashem amlucha, v'aya Hashem lemelech hakol haaretz, b'yom hu Hashem echad shmo echad. When do we say those psukim in that order? When? On Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, in Malchiot. When we have the 3 extra brachot built into the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, the first one is called Malchiot, monarchy, kingship, and so on. And all these 3 brachot, Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofarot, are built upon 10 psukim. 3 from the Chumash, from the Torah, 3 from the Nevi'im, and 3 from Ktuvim. Not in that order. It's Torah, Ktuvim, which they all come from TEHILIM. They all 3 come from TEHILIM. And then we go back to Nevi'im, and then we end with U'b'toratcha katuv lemar. There's one more pasuk that comes from the Torah. Fine. Now, do you know that there are some Siddurim at the end of Shirat Hayam, at the end of Shirat Hayam, in small letters, it says, U'v'toratcha katuv lemar, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Before saying Yishtabach. The Brinat Yisrael didn't print it. That's why many of us here in Israel don't even know about it. But there are other Siddurim. If you take a look at different Siddurim you have at home, open it up to right before Yishtabach, you'll see that after Shirat Hayam, it says in small letters in parentheses, and there are some people who say it till this very day. You can hear it. With those people who are leading the pack for Pesukah Zimra, before Yishtabach, they'll still say it. Maybe loud, not so loud, whatever, and say it. What does it say in the Machzor? In the Machzor of Rosh Hashanah, there are psukim of Malchiot from Torah. Okay. The Vahi Bishur Melech B'Tasef Rashayam Yachat Shiftei Yisrael. You have 3 psukim about Kadosh Baruch Hu Melech. And then you have Tehillim. And from Tehillim, one of the psukim is right. One of that comes from Tehillim, right? Ve'alu Moshe B'Artzion Nishpot Atarisav Vaytal Hashem Amlucha. But then comes from Nevi'im, and from Nevi'im it's from Zechariah. Vaya Hashem lemelech hakol haaretz, bayom oya Hashem elechad shmo echad. And then in the Machzor of Rosh Hashanah we backtrack to Torah. The reason why we do that, because we have to have 10 psukim, 3, 3, and 3, plus 1. The plus 1 comes from the Chumash. So we start with Chumash from Torah, we then gloss over to Ketuvim, to Tehillim, and then we go to Nevi'im, like we forgot something, as if to say, and then we finish up with Torah. So the question is, why is that so? The order is very strange. It should be Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Get in your 4 psukim of Torah, get in your pasuk of Nevi'im, get in your psukim of Tehillim. The Rav said what happened is as follows. Chazal wanted to begin with the Chumash. That's obvious. Torah Moshe is going to take precedence. But then we jump to the bottom of the ladder, because there are 3 grades of Kedusha of Sifrei Kodesh. There's Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. And I can prove this. That's a Mishnah in Masechet Megillah, that if I have a Megillat Esther, and I want to sell it, I can only use that money now to buy a scroll of Nevi'im. And if I have a Sefer Nevi'im that we have, let's say, in our shul for Haftarah, and I want to sell it, the money, I can only upgrade it to a Sefer Torah. You have to upgrade. We can't downgrade. You can't sell a Yeshayahu and buy a Megillat Esther. Can't do that. Because that's called, it says, Ma'alin b'Kodesh v'lo maridin. You have to upgrade in Kedusha. So what we do is we jump to Tehillim, but then we continue going up again, escalating. And we go from Ketuvim, Tehillim, which is Ketuvim, to Nevi'im, and we have the 3 psukim of the Nevi'im, Va'yedei Avedecha Nevi'im Katuv Lemor, right? Chazan Kvarten has a very nice piece on that, those who like Chazanut. And then it gets back to the highest rung, which is Torah. Uve'toratcha Katuv Lemor, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So basically what happened was we started with Torah, we jumped down to Tehillim, which is Ketuvim, we moved up to Nevi'im, and we came back to Torah. What happens in Pesukah Zimra? Pesukah Zimra is Tehillim. So that's Ketuvim. And now we're saying Valu Moshiim Bahar Tzion Lishpot Atarisa. We're saying Shirat Hayam, I'm sorry. We're saying Shirat Hayam, Azashir Moshe, and it ends with Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed. The idea was to bring us out of the realm of Torah. The whole Pesukah Zimra was to take Tehillim. So we moved from the Torah and we said a few psukim from Tehillim. V'yalu Mashiach Bahar Tzion Nishpot Ataresav Vaytal Hashem Amlucha. That was what Ki'ilu, as if to say, ended Shirat Hayam. But then what happened? Because people were used to these psukim, V'yalu Mashiach Bahar Tzion Nishpot Ataresav Vaytal Hashem Amlucha Vayay Hashem L'melech HaKol Haaretz B'yom Hashem Echad U'toratcha Katuv Lemor Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It just naturally gravitated from the Machzor and was planted into Siddur, and it was never originally there. It was never originally there. So what became the minhag was that we say some of those psukim. Ve'alu Moshiim Bahar Tzion Lishpot Atarisa Vaytal Hashem Mucha Vayay Hashem L'melech HaKol Haaretz B'yom Hashem Echad Shmo Echad Zeu. And some people carry it all the way till Shema Yisrael. But it simply was grafted, most probably erroneously, from the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah to the tail end of Shirat Hayam. It shouldn't have even been there. So first of all, look what happened to Shirat Hayam. Shirat Hayam shouldn't have even been part of Pesukah Zimra at all. Then there was a minhag to say it after Yishtabach. Then it became a minhag to say it in the middle of Yishtabach. And it carried with it a formal ending, and we'll say a few words about this in a minute. Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed twice. Every formal ending of any type of saying of Shira carries a double ending to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we really never finish. We don't want to quit. And so we'll say the pasuk a second time. And then it moved, these other psukim came over from the Musaf of Shemona Esrei of Rosh Hashanah, where essentially it wasn't there. The purpose of moving Ve'alu Mosheim B'Har Tzion was to get us back down to Tehillim, where we've moved out of Tehillim because of the psukim of Baruch David, which is, that's Divrei Yam, that's Ktuvim also, it's Divrei Yamim, but Shirat Hayam is Chumash. That's Chumash. So we moved it down symbolically by quoting a pasuk. Ve'alu Mosheim B'Har Tzion, we got back to Tehillim. That's all. So, and Zeu. Beseda, I'm not suggesting at all to make any changes in the Siddur. What we have in our Siddur, that's the minhag, that's what we say. But at least to try to understand what happened. But to know that Shirat Hayam formally ends with Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed, and that's the way it's in the Chumash too. Because in the Chumash, you have a few more psukim there. Kiva, Basus, Paro. That's not Shirat Hayam. Shirat Hayam ends with Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed. That's the end. So the Rabbi always asks the question, philosophically, how can a human being say Shevach, praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Whenever you begin, you're in deep trouble because you can never really finish. As we say in Nishmat Kol Chai, Ilu finu malei shira kayam ulshonenu rina kamon g'alav v'siftotenu shevach k'mechavei rakia. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have granted us all of the abilities to say praise to God, ein enachnu maspikim lahodot, you'd never get through. So how do we end it? And the answer is we end it diplomatically by repeating the last pasuk a second time, by suggesting that we should be saying it again and again and again and again and again and again. And that became the minhag of ending Hallel with repeating the last psukim. That's the Mishnah in Masechet Sukkah that says, Mokum Shenogu, the place where there's a custom, lichpol, to double the last psukim of Hallel, we double. And indeed we do. Otra ke'anitani v'ti l'Yeshua, otra ke'anitani v'ti l'Yeshua, until Hodul Hashem kitov kalam chazdo, Hodul Hashem kitov kalam chazdo. And that's how we elegantly get out of Hallel. And we do it by Psukkah de Zimra also, because Psukkah de Zimra technically ends with the end of the book of Tehillim, Kol haneshama talel yahaluya, kol haneshama talel yahaluya. And that's why when we're introduced to Shirat Hayam, we say Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed twice also, for the same reason, just to elegantly get out of Hallel. I may have mentioned one of the Shirim that when we say Kaddish is also 10 expressions of Shevach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where we say Yitgadel v'kadet at the beginning, and then another 8, Yitbarech, Yishtabach, Yitpa'er, Yitromem, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal. Shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's good Hebrew. Shmesh the Kudsha Baruch Hu is Aramaic. Shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God's name, he should be this, he should be that, he should be this, he should be that. Zel, that's it? 10 expressions of praise to God, and we've done justice? No. He's le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata damiran b'alma. He's way above every expression of praise that was ever, or song that was ever said about God. That's the le'ela. That's the et cetera, that goes on to get us, to elegantly get us out of the mode of saying Shevach, praise to God. Because if you start, you're stuck, because you can never really finish. So, let's take a look a little bit about on source number 8. Source number 8 on the first page. Source number 8 in the middle of the page. Here it tells us it's the headline is Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah. Now, as far as I know, that's in about a half a year. So I just mentioned Chanukah just recently when it was. It was almost 40 degrees here in Yerushalayim, and people were like really, really cringing. And I said to somebody, don't worry, by Hanukkah it'll be better. It usually works. Okay? So if you're hot today outside of tomorrow, just think that we learned today about Hanukkah. And Hanukkah, it cools you down right away. Rambam's going to tell us that on the 8 days of Hanukkah, we complete the Hallel. B'chol yom v'yom mishmonat hayamim ha'elu gomrim et Hallel u'mevarech lefanav, and there's a bracha before. Bet Aleph Yud, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'sav v'tzivanu. All this abbreviated. Ligmor et Hallel. That's the Rambam's language. Ligmor et Hallel, to complete the Hallel. Bein b'yachid, bein b'tzibur. Which means the Rambam is telling us on Hanukkah, you have to complete the Hallel, whether you're alone or whether you're with a minyan. Aval pi shekriyat Hallel mitzvah midivrei sofrim, even though it's a rabbinic mitzvah to read Hallel, nevertheless we make the bracha asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. You have commanded us. Now that's something the Rambam didn't make up that question. The Rambam sees it in the Gemara Masechet Shabbat. The Gemara asked the question with regard to Hanukkah candles. Because it says you're supposed to make a bracha on Hanukkah candles, and you have to make a bracha for reading the Megillah, v'tzivanu l'kroat Megillah. Well, this is not part of the Torah. It's rabbinic add-ons. So the Gemara asked that question, and the Gemara provides us with two scriptural bases for the authority of our Chachamim to legislate mitzvahs. One, because the obvious question is, and it's a very burning question, the Torah tells us twice in the book of Dvarim that there are no toleration of add-ons or deletions. There are 613 mitzvot, Bal Tosif and Bal Tikra. So the question is going to be, how did the Chachamim add? So the Rambam responds to that question. We'll do this a little later. The Rambam responds to that question. Where's the authority? But the Gemara tells us that it's vested in two psukim in the Chumash. Lo tasur min hadavar asher yagidu lecha yamin esmol. Do not deviate left or right from anything that the Chachamim will tell you. This is the authority of the Sanhedrin, the Beit Din HaGadol. So there's authority, which means that governing every rabbinic add-on is a positive mitzvah in the Torah to listen to the words of Chachamim. Fine. And the Gemara tells us another pasuk in Parshat Ha'azinu. How does it start? No. Koyarucha was lo tasur min hadavar small. There it says kachol sheyerucha, and in Parshat Ha'azinu it says sha'al avicha v'yagetcha v'zekenecha v'yomru lach. Your zkenim will tell you should listen and take heed and so on. Fine. So you have two psukim. Why two psukim? What's wrong with one pasuk? So one of the Achronim, the Maharsha, who's Shmuel Idlis from Lublin from the 16th century. So he said, the Maharsha says, because there are rabbinic add-ons that are positive mitzvot, like Hanukkah and Purim, and there are rabbinic add-ons that are negative mitzvot, like Muktzah and Shabbat, and other things. There are so many Isurim Midrabanan, rabbinic prohibitions. So we needed one pasuk to cover the don'ts and one pasuk to cover the do's. So you have Lo Tasur Min Hadavar and Sha'al Avicha V'yagecha. One pasuk reflects the don'ts and one pasuk reflects the do's. So there's authority by Chachamim. Yafeh. So now we know the Vitzivanu is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to listen to the Chachamim who told us that on the 25th of Kislev at night we should light Hanukkah candles. That's really what's packed into that bracha, Vitzivanu ladlik ner shel Chanukah. Fine, and then the Rambam tells us further. He says, just as we make the bracha on Megillah, and just as we make the bracha on putting up and doing an Eruv Tafshilin or Eruv Tchumen, there's a bracha al mitzvat Eruv. Shekol vadai shel divreihem. Everything that was absolute, was not instituted because of a doubt, but it was an institution, but it's rabbinic, mevorchin alav. We do make the bracha on such mitzvot. Aval davar shehu midivreihem v'ikar asiyatan lo misafek. But anything that is rabbinic, but the whole reason why we're doing it is because there's some type of a doubt, then there is no bracha. And he gives an example, maaser demai. So we know from last week's parasha from Korach that you have to take off 10% of your produce and give it to a Levi. But what if you have produce, you bought it in a store, and you don't know if the maaser was taken off or not? So you say you give it anyway, but you don't make a bracha on it. So today, of course, we don't give to the Kohen, we don't give to the Levi, we take it off symbolically. But if you know it comes from the field, there's even a bracha, even till this very day, of lafish trumot and masrot. We do that. But most of us are not on the field, and we're buying stuff. Now, the 99% of the places in Yerushalayim carry a Tudat Hechsher that the Trumot and Maasros were already taken off. And they were taken off already on various levels. If it was a religious kibbutz, they took it off before it even went to the central there. If it was the Tenuva, which is 60% of the produce in the country, it was taken off in their warehouses. And if it comes to the Shuk in Yerushalayim, so it's taken off here. So there's no reason in Yerushalayim to have to go buy shopping, produce, agricultural produce, fruits and vegetables, and start taking off trumas and maasros misafek. That would probably be baltashkas, because it's been taken off already several times over. But tevel is when you buy, sometimes you buy something on the road, on the open road. They're selling watermelons or whatever they're selling, and you don't know if truma was taken off. We were once in the Galil, and we saw such a watermelon, and the guy was a Druze selling from his produce, and he tells us, he says, I'm a goy, you don't have to take off trumas and maasros. I said, where do you have it where goy is faskening a shayla for you? That was something. But he didn't understand that there's a machloket, if yesh kinyan be'eretz Yisrael, l'afkia min ha'masrot of goyim. There's a whole machloket. If a non-Jew has agricultural produce in Eretz Yisrael, does that mean that a Jew eating those produce is exempt entirely? That's a whole shir in itself, whether there's kedushat haaretz for non-Jews. The whole business of selling the land for the Shemitah year, covers that. But anyway, this Rambam, we're going to end with this. The Rambam says the only time that we make a bracha on something that was originally a suffix was on Yom Tov Sheni in Chutz La'aretz. Remember that Yom Tov Sheni? There was such a thing in Chutz La'aretz where they keep a second day Yom Tov. I'm sure all of us have forgotten that long time ago. But we make brachot, and the Gemara asked that question. But it's interesting. The Rambam says, because there was a doubt whether which day was Rosh Chodesh of Nisan, and therefore in Bavel they didn't know, they didn't have communication, so they kept 2 days Yom Tov. And the Gemara says, you're right, there shouldn't be a bracha on Yom Tov Sheni, but we're going to institute that there is a bracha, so that they shouldn't be mizalzel, they shouldn't treat it lightly. Chachamim wanted that in Chutz La'aretz they should keep Yom Tov Sheni, so they instituted the making of all the brachot. You know how many brachot there are? On Seder night, extra brachot that you do, and Chachamim made this as an institution, shelo yizalzelu bo. And that's what the Rambam says here. He says, Mibnei HaSafek, kedei shelo yizalzelu bo. It's straight out of the Gemara in Masechet Beitzah, that's the reason. But otherwise, if it's something we do because of doubt, that's a custom, so there's no bracha on it, says the Rambam. We're going to see next week in Mitzvah Hashem that this story is not over yet, because saying Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is a minhag. And there's a whole question whether they make a bracha on a minhag, and what does it mean that you have Hallel reduced and abbreviated. And there are certain chapters or half chapters that we don't say on Rosh Chodesh or on the 6 out of 7 days of Pesach. Why? Where did that come in? And we'll try to deal with that next week as well. Okay.